All right, today we're jumping into one of the most tragic final chapters in history. We're talking about the last king of Judah, a man who was caught between a massive empire on one side and a divine prophecy on the other. This is the story of Zedekiah.
I mean, just think about that for a second. This is a king who had a throne, sure, but he didn't really have a kingdom. He was a man sitting right in the eye of a hurricane that was about to completely wipe out everything and everyone he'd ever known.
So to really understand how it all went so wrong, we have to go back to the very beginning of his rule. Because here's the thing. Zedekiah wasn't a king who won his crown in some glorious battle or because the people chose him. No, he was put there.
And you can see it right here in his name. He was born Mattaniah, a prince from the line of the great king Josiah. But in 597 BC, when the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II puts him on the throne, he changes his name to Zedekiah. And that wasn't just a friendly suggestion. It was basically a brand, a permanent reminder of who was really calling the shots.
And for the next 11 years, that was his life. Can you imagine? He's wearing the crown of Judah, he's sitting on the throne of David, but he's sending tribute money to Babylon. He was a king, technically, but really he was a subject, just trying to walk this impossible tightrope between keeping his foreign masters happy and dealing with the pride of his own people.
And this is where things get really intense. Because now the pressure just becomes enormous. Zedekiah is caught in this brutal political tug of war, and the very survival of his entire kingdom is hanging by a thread.
And this pretty much sums up the impossible choice he had to make. See, on one side, you've got his own court, the nobles of Judah, and they are just filled with this national pride, thinking back to the glory days. For them, being a vassal state, a puppet kingdom, it was completely humiliating. They're looking at a map, and they see Egypt, the other big superpower, and they're thinking, hey, we can team up with them and kick the Babylonians out.
But then, on his other shoulder, you have the prophet Jeremiah. And he's delivering a message that is stark, it's brutal, and it's something nobody wants to hear. He's basically saying, look, I know you don't like it, but Babylon is a juggernaut. Rebellion isn't freedom, it's a death sentence. The choice couldn't be clearer. Swallow your pride and live, or fight a pointless war and watch Jerusalem burn to the ground.
And get this, it wasn't just Jeremiah shouting into the wind. Hundreds of miles away, deep inside the Babylonian Empire itself, the prophet Ezekiel is sending the exact same warnings, predicting total destruction. The prophetic consensus was overwhelming. It was a giant flashing sign saying, "Do not rebel."
But well, it seems all those warnings just weren't enough. Which brings us to the tipping points, the point of no return. The one single decision that sealed the fate of an entire nation.
And you can just see how quickly everything unravels. After about 8 years of this tense, uneasy peace, Zedekiah makes his choice. In 589 BC, he rebels. And Nebuchadnezzar's reaction? It is swift and it is merciless. He immediately lays siege to Jerusalem, and just a few years later, it's all over.
At the end of the day, he sided with his nobles. He ignored the prophets. He rolled the dice on getting help from Egypt, an alliance that turned out to be nothing but a ghost. The story we get is of a king who was just fatally indecisive, pulled back and forth until he was swayed by the promise of glory instead of the warnings of disaster.
The price for that failed bet was a nightmare. I mean, a nightmare beyond what any of them could have imagined. The Babylonian army descended, and the city of Jerusalem was caught in an absolute death grip.
Just let that number sink in. 30 months. That's 2.5 years trapped inside the city walls. No food coming in, no way to escape. The city was just slowly, painfully starved. The conditions inside those walls were absolutely horrific. We're talking widespread famine, disease running rampant. The desperation reached levels that are honestly hard to even comprehend. There are accounts of people resorting to cannibalism, even eating their own children just to survive. It was a complete and total breakdown of society. And finally, the inevitable happened. The Babylonian army smashed through the city's defenses. And they didn't just conquer Jerusalem, they erased it. The city was burned to the ground, and Solomon's temple, the very heart of their culture and their faith for hundreds of years, was utterly destroyed. Gone.
You'd think the story couldn't get any worse, right? But it does. The horror wasn't over. For Zedekiah himself, things were about to get very, very personal, and much, much worse. As his city burned, he tried to escape in the chaos of the night, but he was caught. They dragged him before Nebuchadnezzar, and there they forced him to watch as they executed his own sons right in front of him. And only after he saw that did they blind him. He was then put in bronze chains and dragged off to Babylon to live out the rest of his life in total darkness.
Let that just sink in for a moment. The Babylonians were deliberate. They made absolutely sure that the final image burned into his mind for the rest of his life was the complete and total destruction of his own family, his own legacy. It's a level of cruelty that's just unimaginable.
So, as you can see, Zedekiah's reign isn't just a sad story about one king. It's a massive, seismic turning point in history. This is the moment the line of Davidic kings in Jerusalem ends. It's the destruction of the First Temple. And it's the beginning of the Babylonian exile, an event that would fundamentally change Jewish identity forever.
And that leaves us with this final, haunting question. When you look at the whole story, what do you think? Was he just a weak king who couldn't make a tough call, who caved to pressure and doomed his people? Or was he a truly tragic figure, a man put in a no-win situation from day one, destined to fail no matter which way he turned? The answer, a lot like the king himself, is still trapped somewhere in the ruins of history.